stop before you skip this. Before your brain tells you, I already know how to talk to people, I want you to think about something. Think about the last time you walked away from a conversation and felt that quiet, hollow ache. You said the words. You showed up. But somehow, the other person still didn't get you. Or worse, you left feeling more alone than before you started talking. That feeling? That's not a language problem. That's not a confidence problem. That's a connection problem. And here's what nobody told you growing up. Connection is a skill. It can be learned, practiced, sharpened, and in the next few minutes, I'm going to show you exactly how. Because here's the truth that changed everything for me. The most magnetic, influential, deeply trusted people in the world, the ones whose words seem to land differently, whose presence feels like a warm exhale, whose conversations leave you feeling seen. They're not just naturally gifted. They understand something most people don't. And by the time you're done here, so will you. So stay with me. Because what I'm about to share isn't just theory. It's the invisible architecture behind every conversation that matters. Chapter 1. The real foundation. Nobody taught you. Here's a thought that might sting a little. Most of us were taught to talk, but never taught to communicate. We learned grammar in school. We practiced presentations. We were told to speak up, make eye contact, use a firm handshake. But nobody ever sat us down and explained what's actually happening beneath the surface of a conversation. The invisible currents of emotion, energy, and meaning that determine whether someone walks away feeling connected to you or completely indifferent. Think of communication like an iceberg. The words you choose, the actual sentences you construct, those are the tiny tip poking above the water. Visible, yes, but carrying only a fraction of the weight. The massive bulk underneath? That's your tone, your body language, your emotional presence, the energy you carry into the room. Research tells us that your actual words account for roughly 7% of the impact you have on another person. Your voice, the warmth in it, the pace of it, the weight behind it, carries about 38%. And your physical presence, the way you hold your body, the openness of your face, the stillness or restlessness in your hands, that carries the remaining 55%. Let that settle for a moment. If you've been working overtime crafting perfect sentences, searching for exactly the right words to say, you've been polishing the tip of the iceberg while the rest of it goes completely unexamined. But here's where it gets genuinely fascinating. Great communication isn't just about transmitting a message. It's about creating what researchers call interpersonal resonance, a state where two people begin to unconsciously sync up, like two tuning forks vibrating at the same frequency. When this happens, something remarkable unfolds. Trust accelerates. Creativity ignites. Memories form more vividly. Problems that seemed impossible suddenly feel solvable together. You've felt this before. Maybe it was a conversation at a coffee shop that somehow stretched into 3 hours. Maybe it was a late-night phone call with an old friend where everything just flowed. Maybe it was a stranger you met on a flight who, for some reason, felt like someone you'd known for years. In those moments, your nervous systems were genuinely synchronizing, your breathing was matching, your brains were humming at compatible frequencies. This isn't poetic metaphor. It's measurable neuroscience. The heartbreaking part? Most of us have never been taught to create this intentionally. We've been trained to win arguments, not to understand perspectives. We've been taught to prepare our next point, not to truly receive what someone else is saying. We've learned to fill silences, not to honor them. And that's exactly why so many conversations feel like two people performing monologues in the same room. The foundation of genuinely great communication rests on three pillars. Not tricks, not tactics. Three deep human qualities. The first is presence. The rare, radical act of being fully here with this person in this moment. Not mentally rehearsing your next sentence, not half distracted by the notification buzzing in your pocket. Fully, warmly, completely here. The second is empathy, the willingness to climb out of your own experience and temporarily live inside someone else's, to genuinely feel the contours of their perspective even when it's foreign or uncomfortable to you. The third is authenticity, the quiet courage to show up as your actual self, without performance, without armor, while still being sensitive to what the moment requires. When these three qualities combine, something almost magical happens. You stop trying to impress people and start connecting with them. You stop managing how you appear and start caring about how they feel. And paradoxically, beautifully, the moment you stop trying to be impressive, you become genuinely influential in ways you never imagined possible. This is the ground we're building everything else on, not a bag of tricks, not a manipulation playbook, a real honest understanding of how human beings connect and how you can become the kind of person others naturally lean toward, trust instinctively, and remember long after the conversation ends. Chapter 2. Why people pull away and how to make them stay. Here's something I want you to really absorb. Every single person you meet today is carrying an invisible weight. Not a burden you can see, not something they'll mention in casual conversation. But underneath every professional handshake, every polite small talk exchange, every carefully composed text message, there's a fundamental human need, aching quietly in the background. The need to feel understood, the need to feel valued, the need to feel like they are, in some small but real way, enough. This isn't weakness. This isn't neediness. This is the bedrock of human psychology. The most intimidating CEO in the corner office has this need. The coolest, most unreadable person at the party has this need. Your most stoic family member has this need. And so do you. When you walk into any conversation, you are either feeding that need or starving it. There's no neutral. Every exchange either moves someone closer to feeling seen or pushes them further into the quiet loneliness of feeling dismissed. And here's the part that changes everything. People will always remember how you made them feel long after they've forgotten a single word you said. You could be the most technically brilliant person in the room, armed with the most accurate information, the most logical arguments, the most impressive credentials. And if people walk away from conversations with you feeling small, dismissed, or unheard, none of it matters. But when you make someone feel genuinely intelligent, genuinely important, genuinely seen, they'll trust you even in the moments you're wrong, because they believe, at a gut level, that you care about their well-being, not just your own agenda. Here's what's happening beneath the surface of every interaction. Your brain, and the brain of every person you talk to, is running a rapid, mostly unconscious diagnostic. 3 questions, asked and answered in milliseconds. Am I safe with this person? This question determines whether someone's walls go up or come down within the first few seconds of meeting you. Do they respect me? This question determines whether someone shares their real thoughts with you or shows you only what they think is acceptable and safe. Are they for me or against me? This question determines whether someone sees you as a potential ally in their story or a potential threat to it. When someone's subconscious answers yes to all 3, you get access to the best version of them, their real ideas, their genuine enthusiasm, their authentic collaboration. When even one answer is no, you're talking to their defended, armored self, and real communication becomes nearly impossible, no matter how skillfully you choose your words. This is why the most effective communicators in the world don't lead with their agenda. They lead with safety. They understand that influence is a natural byproduct of trust, not a shortcut around it. But there's another layer here that most people miss completely. Every person you talk to is arriving inside their own emotional weather system, shaped by what happened to them this morning, by the difficult phone call they had last week, by the relationship that ended 2 years ago, by the worry that kept them awake at 3 a.m. They are not a blank screen waiting to receive your message. They are a complex, layered, beautifully complicated human being whose inner world will either harmonize with your energy or clash against it. Skilled communicators learn to sense these weather systems quickly. When someone arrives tense and overloaded, they become calmer, more spacious. When someone arrives bright and energized, they let themselves match that lightness. When someone arrives skeptical and guarded, they lead with curiosity and warmth instead of logic and arguments. They also understand something profound about emotional contagion. Emotions are literally contagious. Your brain contains mirror neurons, tiny, remarkable cells that automatically begin mimicking the emotions you observe in others. This means the emotional state you carry into a conversation doesn't stay inside you. It spreads. If you arrive anxious, you seed anxiety. If you arrive genuinely curious and warm, you cultivate safety and openness. If you arrive defensive, you trigger defensiveness in return. This isn't about performance. It's about responsibility. The emotional atmosphere of every interaction you have is something you are partly, sometimes largely, creating. And once you realize that, you can begin creating it intentionally. There's one more piece to this psychology that I find endlessly fascinating. Human beings don't experience life as a series of facts and events. We experience life as stories. We are narrative creatures all the way down, and every person you meet is living inside their own story, a story about who they are, what they deserve, what's possible for them. The communicators who create the deepest connection and the most lasting influence are the ones who help people become the heroes of their own stories, not by flattering them falsely, but by asking the questions that help them discover their own wisdom, by listening in a way that helps them hear themselves more clearly, by reflecting back the potential they might not yet fully see in themselves. When you can do this, when you become someone who amplifies people rather than diminishing them. The way others experience you changes completely. Chapter 3. The Mirror. You're afraid to look into self-awareness is the most powerful communication skill almost nobody talks about. We love talking about techniques, strategies, the right things to say in the right moments. But the honest truth is this: the gap between who you intend to be in conversations and who you're actually being, that gap is almost always invisible to you and almost always visible to everyone around you. Let me give you an example that might feel uncomfortably familiar. Have you ever been in a conversation where you were technically listening, nodding, making eye contact, saying "uh-huh" at the right moments, while simultaneously composing your response, replanning your afternoon, or reliving an argument from earlier that day? You were physically present, but you were completely absent, and the person talking to you could feel it. They couldn't have explained exactly what was off, but something was. A subtle flatness, a slight hollowness behind your eyes. People are exquisitely sensitive to this. Self-awareness in communication means developing the honest, sometimes uncomfortable capacity to see yourself. Not just to experience yourself from the inside, but to understand how you're actually landing on the outside. Let's start with emotional triggers, because these are the silent landmines that blow apart more conversations than any other single factor. Everyone carries them. Certain topics, tones, or patterns that instantly activate your defensive systems. Maybe it's when someone questions your judgment. Maybe it's when you feel interrupted or talked over. Maybe it's when someone's tone carries just a note of condescension. The moment you get triggered, your thoughtful, curious, empathetic self goes offline. A more reactive, protective version steps in. The problem isn't getting triggered. That's human and inevitable. The problem is not knowing it's happening until after you've said something you regret and the conversation has quietly derailed. Self-aware communicators develop what psychologists call metacognition, the ability to think about your thinking while it's happening, to maintain a small, quiet observer inside yourself that watches the conversation from a slight remove. You're simultaneously in the exchange and watching the exchange, engaged and observing at once. This sounds abstract, but here's what it looks like in practice. You're in a conversation that starts to feel charged. Instead of just being frustrated or defensive, you notice it. I'm getting activated right now. Something in what they just said caught on something in me. That noticing, that tiny gap of awareness, is everything. Because in that gap, you have a choice. You can respond from your triggered state, or you can take a breath and respond from your actual values. Self-awareness also means understanding your communication patterns, the habits you've developed, some protective, some just deeply ingrained, that might not be serving you the way they once did. Maybe you tend to take over conversations when you're excited about a topic. Maybe you go quiet and withdraw when you feel unheard. Maybe you become overly agreeable when you want to be liked, or overly assertive when you feel challenged. None of these are character flaws. They're just patterns. Patterns that once made sense, and patterns that, once you can see them, you can begin to consciously choose differently. One of the most disarming and effective things you can ever say in a conversation is, "I notice I'm feeling a bit defensive right now. and I want to make sure I'm really hearing you. That sentence does something remarkable. It creates safety. It signals honesty. It shifts the dynamic from adversarial to collaborative in a single breath. And it's only possible when you have the self-awareness to catch what's happening inside you before it hijacks the interaction. Understanding your communication style and how it lands on people who are different from you is equally crucial. Some of us are naturally direct and task-focused. Others are more relational and process-oriented. Some people communicate in broad strokes and get frustrated by too much detail. Others need context and nuance before they feel comfortable moving forward. None of these styles are better or worse, but your natural style will click beautifully with some people and create friction with others, not because of incompatibility, but because of unawareness. When you know your style deeply, you can begin making conscious choices. When to lean into your natural strengths and when to consciously stretch toward something different. If you're naturally direct, you might choose to add more warmth when you're speaking to someone who's more emotionally sensitive. If you're naturally gentle, you might practice being clearer and more assertive when a conversation requires it. Self-awareness also extends to your internal state before conversations even begin. When you're exhausted, overwhelmed, or emotionally raw, your communication abilities genuinely diminish. You become shorter-tempered, less curious, more likely to misread situations. Emotionally intelligent communicators develop the habit of checking in with themselves before important conversations, taking a few breaths, noticing what they're carrying, and either preparing appropriately or, when possible, postponing conversations they're not equipped to have well. The most mature expression of self-awareness is taking full responsibility for your impact, even when your intention was good. You can mean well and still cause harm. You can try to help and still make someone feel worse. Self-aware communicators are willing to hear this, sit with it, and adjust. Not because they're perfect, but because they care more about their actual impact than about defending their intentions. And here's the beautiful paradox. The more honest you become about your own limitations, the more powerfully you connect with others. Because people don't trust perfection. They trust authenticity. Chapter 4. The Lost Art of Actually Listening. If communication had a most underrated player award, it would go to listening, without question, every year, unanimously. We live in a world that glorifies speaking. The articulate person gets the promotion. The confident voice commands the room. The quick wit wins the conversation. We celebrate those who can speak brilliantly, and we've quietly, collectively forgotten that the other half of every conversation, the listening half, is where the real magic lives. Here's a distinction I want you to carry with you. Hearing and listening are not the same thing. Hearing is passive. Your ears receive sound. Your brain decodes it into language. It happens automatically. You don't have to do anything. But listening, real listening, is one of the most active, demanding, generous things one human being can offer another. Most of what we call listening in everyday conversations is actually something else entirely. It's waiting. It's the polite performance of attention while your inner voice is already composing your response, or making judgments about what's being said, or connecting what you're hearing back to your own experience. Oh, that reminds me of when I... And off you go, back inside your own world. Real listening asks you to do something genuinely difficult, to stay, to resist the pull back into your own head, to remain curious and open in the presence of another person's experience, even when it's uncomfortable, even when you disagree, even when everything in you wants to jump in and respond. And here's the heartbreaking, beautiful truth. Most people have almost never experienced this. Despite moving through a life full of people who hear them speak, most individuals have had very few moments of feeling truly, completely, non-judgmentally listened to, really understood, really received, really held in someone's full attention. This is why people who can genuinely listen seem almost magnetic. They don't even have to say very much. Their presence does something. People lean toward them. People open up to them. People remember them long after the conversation ends. Active listening begins with a simple but powerful reframe. The goal is understanding, not agreement. You don't have to agree with someone to listen fully. You don't have to share their perspective, validate their conclusions, or endorse their choices. You just have to genuinely try to understand their experience from the inside. That's all. And that's everything. The first level of real listening is attending to the words, not just their surface meaning, but the emotional current running underneath. People rarely say exactly what they mean on the first attempt. They circle. They test the water with safer language before they're willing to go deeper. They express their most vulnerable feelings through what seem like casual remarks. A skilled listener learns to hear the emotion beneath the words. When someone says, "I'm fine," in a voice that clearly isn't fine. When someone uses extreme language, always, never, everyone, nobody, and you recognize the emotional overwhelm distorting their perspective. When someone's voice goes just slightly quieter when they mention a particular topic. These are the signals most people miss. The second level is listening to what's not being said. The pauses, the hesitations, the subjects that get carefully sidestepped. The energy in the room that shifts when a certain name or topic comes up. Some of the most important communication in any conversation happens in the spaces between words. The third level is listening to the whole person. Posture, breathing, facial micro-expressions. The subtle changes in how someone holds their body when they feel safe versus when they feel exposed. Human beings communicate with everything they have, not just their voices. When you expand your listening to include all of these channels, you begin picking up information that others miss entirely. The fourth level, and this one takes real practice, is listening for possibility. Hearing not just what someone is saying about where they are, but what they're longing for, what they're moving toward, what they're afraid of. You listen for the dream underneath the complaint, the need underneath the anger, the hope underneath the resignation. When you listen at this depth, you often hear things people aren't even fully aware they're communicating. One of the most powerful tools you can develop is the reflective response. Instead of immediately jumping to advice, solutions, or your own perspective, you first demonstrate understanding by gently mirroring back what you've heard. Both the content and the emotion beneath it. It sounds like you're feeling really stretched thin right now, and part of you's wondering, if it's always going to feel this way. Or, I'm hearing that this matters to you more than you've let on, and you're trying to figure out how to say that without feeling vulnerable. When someone hears themselves reflected back with that kind of accuracy and warmth, something releases in them. They feel less alone, more understood, more willing to go deeper, and they open up in ways they rarely do with people who jump straight to giving advice. One final crucial thing about listening: it will change you, not just the people you're listening to. When you genuinely let people in, when you sit with their stories, their struggles, their joy, their confusion, you become more nuanced, more compassionate, less certain that your own perspective is the only one that makes sense. You become a better problem solver, a more trusted friend, a more effective leader, not because you have more answers, but because you've learned to ask better questions and to actually receive the answers. Chapter 5. The silent conversation happening right now. Here's something worth sitting with. While you've been reading these words, your body has been communicating continuously. The slight tension or openness in your shoulders, the way you're holding your breath or releasing it, the micro-expressions flickering across your face as certain ideas land or resist. You haven't said a single word, and yet, if someone were watching you, they'd already know quite a bit about what's happening inside you. This is the silent conversation, the one that runs beneath every spoken exchange, louder and more honest than anything people actually say out loud. Most people think they're decent at reading body language because they catch the obvious stuff: crossed arms, avoiding eye contact, a forced smile. But this surface-level reading is like looking at the first page of a book and thinking you understand the whole story. Worse, it leads to constant misreading, because the same signal can mean completely different things depending on the person, the context, and the moment. The truth about nonverbal communication is this: it's never about isolated gestures. It's about clusters, multiple signals forming a coherent picture. And it's about baseline deviation, noticing when someone's behavior shifts from their normal pattern, because that shift is where the real information lives. Let's start with the face, because it's often the richest source of unspoken communication. Basic emotions, joy, sadness, fear, disgust, surprise, anger, have fairly universal facial expressions across cultures. But what matters most aren't the big, obvious emotions. It's the micro-expressions, the tiny flickers that cross someone's face in a fraction of a second before they compose themselves. A flash of doubt before they say, "I'm confident this will work." A momentary tightening around the eyes when a particular topic comes up, even as their voice stays relaxed and casual. One distinction worth learning immediately: a genuine smile and a social smile are physically different. A real smile, what researchers call a Duchenne smile, engages the muscles around the eyes, creating small crinkles in the corners. A polite or performed smile typically activates only the lower face, leaving the eyes completely unchanged. Once you learn to notice this difference, you'll start seeing it everywhere. And you'll know in an instant whether someone is genuinely happy to see you or just being appropriately cordial. Perhaps even more valuable than reading emotions is learning to spot incongruence. The moments when what someone's face is doing doesn't match what their words are saying. Someone might tell you enthusiastically that they love an idea while their expression carries a quiet flicker of concern. Someone might assure you they understand while their brow holds a slight tension of confusion. When words and face diverge, the face is almost always telling the truth. Eye contact patterns carry a lot of information, but less about deception than most people think, and more about comfort, connection, and cognitive processing. Someone who normally maintains warm, steady eye contact, but suddenly starts glancing away, might be feeling uncomfortable with the direction the conversation is heading. Someone who's usually more reserved but begins holding sustained eye contact might be trying to emphasize something that really matters to them. The direction someone's eyes move can also offer clues about how they're processing information, whether they're recalling something real or constructing something new. Though these patterns vary by individual and should never be used as definitive proof of anything. Body positioning and posture reveal attitudes that people are often unwilling or unable to articulate. Genuine interest tends to pull people slightly forward, toward you. Skepticism or discomfort often creates a subtle lean back or an unconscious placement of objects, a coffee cup, a laptop, a bag, between themselves and you. Open postures with uncrossed limbs and relaxed shoulders generally signal receptiveness. Closed postures suggest some form of resistance, though context always matters. Someone crossing their arms in a cold coffee shop isn't necessarily defensive. They might just be cold. Gestures add texture and rhythm to what people say. The key isn't what gesture someone makes, but how it relates to their baseline and how it's timed with their words. When someone's gestures and speech are synchronized, it signals coherence and authenticity. When gestures lag behind words or seem disconnected from the emotional content of what's being said, it can indicate that someone is struggling to fully express something or choosing their words more carefully than their body language can keep up with. Voice, the pace, the pitch, the texture, the volume, carries an enormous amount of emotional freight. A slight rise in pitch can transform a statement into a plea. A drop in volume can signal shame or fear more clearly than any words. A sudden increase in pace can reveal anxiety or excitement, while deliberate slowing often signals emphasis or emotional weight. When someone's voice changes unexpectedly, gets tighter or faster or quieter, something has shifted inside them. Skilled listeners hear this and adjust. Breathing is one of the most underrated nonverbal signals of all. Shallow, fast breathing suggests anxiety or agitation. Long, slow exhales often indicate relief or the release of something held. Breath holding, followed by a sudden release, can signal a decision being made. When you learn to notice the rhythm of someone's breathing, you're tapping into information that bypasses their verbal defenses entirely. Physical distance, how close or far someone positions themselves from you, is a reliable indicator of comfort and trust. People naturally move toward those they feel safe with and create distance from those who make them uncertain. Someone who steps back slightly mid-conversation might need more space to feel comfortable. Someone who unconsciously closes the gap between you might be seeking more connection, more warmth, more together. Here's the ethical heart of all of this. Nonverbal signals are information, not verdict. They provide clues, not conclusions. The appropriate response to noticing incongruence or discomfort in someone is never to silently analyze them from a distance. It's to slow down, check in, perhaps adjust your approach to help them feel safer. A gentle, "How are you feeling about all of this?" or "Is there something I've missed?" offered with genuine care will always tell you more than any amount of quiet observation, and the most sophisticated application of nonverbal awareness isn't reading others. It's becoming intentional about what you're communicating without words. When you understand that your posture creates atmosphere, that your eye contact signals safety or threat, that your breathing sets the emotional tone of an interaction, you stop being an accidental broadcaster and become a conscious one. You begin using your whole self to create the conditions for real connection. Chapter 6. The Bridge Between Two People. There's a concept in communication that doesn't get nearly enough attention, and it might be the single most practical skill in this entire conversation. It's called rapport. And most people either take it for granted when it happens naturally or feel helpless when it doesn't. Rapport is the feeling of being in sync with someone. It's the invisible quality that makes certain conversations feel effortless, while others feel like pushing a boulder uphill. It's the reason you can meet a complete stranger at a friend's dinner party and feel within 15 minutes like you've somehow always known them. Or why you can sit across from someone for an hour and still feel like there's a pane of glass between you. Here's what most people don't realize. Rapport isn't luck. It's not just chemistry. It's not something that either exists or doesn't. It's a skill, a collection of very learnable behaviors that create the conditions for genuine connection. And you can develop it intentionally without it ever feeling manufactured or fake. The foundation of rapport is something researchers call unconscious matching. When two people feel genuinely connected, their bodies begin to synchronize, their breathing rates align, their postures mirror each other, their speech rhythms start to harmonize, their energy levels find a compatible frequency. You've seen this at your favorite cafe, watching a couple deep in conversation, how they're leaning at nearly the same angle, how one lifts their coffee cup and the other follows moments later, how their laughter rises and falls together. This synchronization happens naturally when connection is already present. But skilled communicators don't wait for it. They initiate it, gently, subtly, without ever making it obvious or mechanical. The simplest starting point is energy matching. If you walk up to someone who's speaking quietly and moving deliberately, and you greet them with loud, rapid, high-energy enthusiasm, you don't create connection. You create a jarring contrast that makes them want to step back. But if you bring yourself down to their frequency first, quieter, slower, more spacious, they immediately feel something settle, something safe. You can always bring energy up once connection is established, but you rarely win someone over by overwhelming them first. You can also match speech patterns in subtle ways. Someone who speaks slowly and chooses their words with care is telling you something about how they process. Give them room. Don't rush the silence or finish their sentences. Someone who speaks quickly and thinks out loud as they talk will feel stifled by overly careful measured responses. Match their pace while maintaining your clarity. Someone who uses visual language, I see what you mean. That looks right to me. The picture I have is wired to process through images, and incorporating similar imagery into your responses will make your words land more naturally. But the most powerful form of rapport, the kind that creates real, lasting trust, happens at the emotional level. When you can accurately sense and gently reflect what someone is feeling, not just what they're saying, something opens in them. A guardedness drops. A defensiveness softens. They feel encountered in a way that goes beyond words. This is what emotional intelligence researchers call affective empathy. Not just understanding someone's emotional experience intellectually, but allowing yourself to genuinely feel an echo of it. This doesn't mean absorbing other people's emotions as if they were your own, or losing your own equilibrium in order to match theirs. It means opening yourself enough to sense their inner weather and responding in a way that says, quietly but clearly, I see you. I'm here. You're not alone in this. When someone feels that, truly feels it, the defenses come down in ways that no amount of persuasion or logic could ever achieve. Now, let's talk about trust, which is the deeper foundation beneath rapport. Rapport can build quickly. Trust builds over time. But even in a first interaction, you can establish the seeds of trust through what researchers call micro-demonstrations of trustworthiness. Small, specific actions that signal your reliability and genuine care for the other person. Remembering something they mentioned earlier in the conversation and referencing it naturally. Following through on a small commitment you made. Even something as minor as sending a link you mentioned. Admitting openly when you don't know the answer to something, instead of filling the gap with false confidence. These things seem small. They're not. They're the building blocks of something that, once established, becomes almost unshakable. One of the most powerful trust-building behaviors is admitting you don't know something. This runs counter to every instinct most of us have, especially in professional settings. We've been trained to project certainty, to signal competence, to never let them see you uncertain. But people have exquisitely calibrated detectors for false confidence. They can feel it, and it erodes trust faster than almost anything else. When you can say with genuine ease, "That's a great question. I honestly don't know, but I'd love to find out," you're not revealing weakness. You're demonstrating integrity, and integrity is the bedrock of trust. Genuine curiosity about people, real interest in who they are, not just what they can offer you, is one of the most magnetic, trust-building qualities you can cultivate. People can feel the difference between someone who's asking questions to be polite and someone who's actually listening to the answers. Authentic curiosity communicates something rare and deeply valued. You matter to me. Not just what you can do for me. You. The physical environment shapes rapport and trust in ways we often underestimate. When possible, choose settings for important conversations that feel safe and equitable. Not a high-power arrangement where one person is clearly dominant and the other feels evaluated. Sitting at a slight angle rather than directly opposite creates a sense of collaboration rather than confrontation. Removing physical barriers, moving a laptop or bag that's sitting between you, opens the space Different personalities need different paths to rapport. Some people open up quickly and love the warmth of personal conversation before getting to business. Others need to establish credibility and competence first. They warm up through respect, not through coziness. Some people trust those who are direct and efficient with their time. Others trust those who are patient and thorough. The key is developing sensitivity to these differences and finding the expression of yourself that meets each person where they are. Not by becoming someone else, but by choosing which facets of your authentic self to foreground in each interaction, and perhaps above everything else, trust is maintained through consistency. If you say you'll call, call. If you commit to something, deliver. The small promises, the ones that seem too minor to matter, are often the most trust-defining of all, because they're the ones that reveal when no one is watching and nothing significant is at stake, whether your word actually means something. Chapter 7. The conversations you've been avoiding. Let's talk about the conversations you've been putting off. You know the ones. The thing you need to address with someone at work that you keep deciding isn't the right moment for. The conversation with a family member that's been hovering in the background for months, getting heavier. The honest feeling you haven't expressed to someone close because you're not quite sure how it will land. And the thought of it landing badly feels unbearable. Most of us avoid difficult conversations for one of two reasons. Either we're afraid of conflict, afraid of the hurt, the anger, the irreversible damage a wrong word might cause, or we've attempted these conversations before and they went sideways. They turned into arguments or became sessions of mutual wounding, and we left feeling worse than when we started. So we wait. We manage. We adjust around the issue like walking around furniture in a dark room. And slowly, quietly, the unspoken thing grows, not smaller with time, but larger, until it has become a weight on the relationship that both people feel, but neither names. Here's the reframe that changes everything about how you approach these conversations. Difficult conversations aren't threats to relationships. They're investments in them. Every time you bring a hard truth into the open with care and respect, you're saying something profound to the other person. I value us enough to be honest. I believe we're strong enough to handle this. I want us to be real with each other, not just comfortable. That's a profound act of trust. And when it's received in kind, it deepens connection in ways that pleasant, surface-level conversation never can. Before you initiate a difficult conversation, spend a few quiet minutes with yourself. Get honest about your real intention. Ask, what outcome do I actually want here? Do I want to be heard? Do I want to understand something better? Do I want to solve a problem? Do I want to change a pattern? The more clearly you can articulate your genuine goal, the more likely you are to stay oriented toward it when the conversation gets charged. And it will. Also, check in with your emotional state honestly. If you're still in the fire of anger or hurt, the conversation can wait. Not forever. Avoidance isn't the answer, but long enough for you to move from the burning center of the emotion to a place where you can feel it and speak from it without being controlled by it. When you're ready to begin, start by establishing safety. This means making your intention explicit before you get into the content. Something like, I really care about our relationship, and there's something I've been wanting to talk through, not to blame you or start a fight, but because I think if we can understand each other better, things will be better between us. That sentence alone can transform the emotional starting point of the entire conversation. Use I language whenever you're describing your experience, not because it's a magic phrase, but because it's accurate. I've been feeling describes your inner reality. You always makes a claim about someone else's character and almost always triggers defensiveness because it's usually not entirely accurate and people know it. When you say, when you cancel plans at the last minute, I feel like I'm not a priority to you, you're sharing your experience. That's hard to argue with. When you say, you never consider my feelings, you're making a character judgment. That invites a war. Listen for what's underneath what the other person is saying, especially when they're saying it in ways that are difficult to receive. Anger is almost always covering something more vulnerable: fear, grief, shame, or the specific hurt of feeling unseen. When someone says, you never listen to me, they might be saying, I feel lonely in this relationship, and I'm scared that's not going to change. When someone lashes out, they're usually someone in pain, and responding to the pain underneath, rather than defending against the attack on top, is what shifts the dynamic. Acknowledge emotions before you engage with content. Before you explain your side, before you offer solutions, before you defend yourself, witness what they're feeling. A simple, I can see this has really been affecting you, and I'm glad you're telling me, can transform the entire temperature of a conversation. Acknowledgement doesn't mean agreement, it means humanity. When conversations become genuinely heated, when both of you are starting to speak from the raw, reactive part of yourselves rather than the thoughtful part, pause. Name it. I can feel us both getting really charged right now. Can we take 5 minutes and come back to this? This isn't avoidance, it's wisdom. You're not abandoning the conversation. You're protecting the conditions needed to have it well. Look for common ground, even in the middle of deep disagreement. You might not agree on the solution, but you probably both agree that the relationship matters, that some version of resolution would be better than the ongoing weight of unaddressed tension. Starting from shared values, rather than from opposing positions, changes the geometry of the conversation from adversarial to collaborative. And when you're wrong, take responsibility clearly, not a vague, defensive, I'm sorry if you were upset, which implicitly places the problem in the other person's sensitivity. A real apology. I said something that hurt you. I understand why. That wasn't okay. Here's what I'm going to do differently. Specific, accountable, committed to change. Not every difficult conversation will end with neat resolution. Some conversations are the beginning of a longer process. Some will end in honest acknowledgement of difference rather than agreement. And some will simply be the courage of having said something true out loud between two people who matter to each other, and finding that the relationship survived and even deepened because of it. The most important thing you can carry into any difficult conversation is genuine respect for the other person's humanity. Even when you strongly disagree with their choices, even when they've hurt you, People can feel whether you see them as fundamentally good but struggling, or fundamentally flawed and problematic. That distinction shapes everything about where the conversation can go. Chapter 8. The difference between influence and manipulation. Let's get something clear from the beginning of this chapter because it matters. Real influence has nothing to do with manipulation. Manipulation is about getting what you want by bypassing someone else's judgment. Real influence is about helping people see possibilities they hadn't considered and making choices that genuinely serve them. The difference isn't just ethical, it's practical. Manipulation might work once. Real influence builds something that compounds over years. The foundation of genuine influence is credibility, and credibility, at its core, is trust. Before anyone will be moved by what you say, they need to believe three things: that you know what you're talking about, that you're honest, and that you care about their well-being, not just your own agenda. Everything we've covered so far, listening deeply, building rapport, showing up authentically, following through consistently, that's all credibility in the making. But here's the insight that changes how effective communicators approach influence. People are persuaded most powerfully by their own conclusions, not by someone else's compelling argument, not by the most eloquent case, by the thought they arrived at themselves, following a path you helped illuminate. This means the most influential approach isn't to present your conclusion and then defend it. It's to guide someone through a process of discovery, asking questions that help them think through the implications, sharing relevant perspectives that expand their view, creating the conditions for them to reach the insight on their own. When someone concludes something themselves, it doesn't feel like being convinced. It feels like clarity, like finally seeing something that was there all along. For example, instead of saying, "You should invest more time in developing your team," you might ask, "What do you think holds your team back from performing at their best?" Then, "What difference do you think it would make if they had more structured support?" Then, "What would be possible for you if that capacity was there?" You're not pushing. You're opening doors and letting them walk through. Understanding what motivates different people is essential for effective influence. Some people are driven primarily by logic and evidence. They want data, analysis, and clear reasoning before they'll commit to anything. Emotional appeals feel manipulative to them. Solid, well-sourced arguments feel respectful. Others are driven more by relationships and feelings. They want to know how a decision will affect the people around them and whether the people they trust support it. Facts matter, but they're secondary to emotional alignment. Some people are motivated by moving toward something positive, energized by vision, possibility, and the excitement of what could be. Others are motivated by moving away from something negative, driven by the desire to avoid failure, risk, or loss. Showing an opportunity to someone who's motivated by threat avoidance might fall flat, while highlighting what they stand to lose if they don't act will land with far more force. The most effective influencers learn to recognize these differences quickly and adapt their approach accordingly, not by becoming something they're not, but by choosing which genuine aspects of the value they're offering to foreground for each particular person. Social proof is one of the most powerful influence tools available because humans are fundamentally social creatures who look to others for cues about what's safe, smart, and worthwhile. When you can share genuine stories about people who faced similar challenges and found success through the approach you're suggesting, you help someone envision themselves having a similar experience. The key word is genuine. Exaggerated testimonials, manufactured urgency, and inflated claims don't just fail. They destroy the credibility you've built. Real stories told honestly carry far more weight. Reciprocity is another foundational principle of influence, deeply wired into human psychology. When someone does something valuable for you, you feel a natural pull to return the gesture. This means that one of the most powerful influence strategies is also one of the most generous. Give first. Give real value. Give it without strings attached and without expectation of return. When you consistently provide genuine value to people, sharing useful information, making meaningful introductions, offering honest feedback, influence tends to follow naturally because you've become someone associated with benefit, not extraction. The most sophisticated influence operates at the level of identity. When you can connect what you're suggesting to who someone is, to the values they hold most deeply, the person they want to be, the story they're living, resistance often dissolves without a fight. Given how much you care about building something that lasts, this approach might really resonate with you. Or, I know that integrity is non-negotiable for you, and that's exactly why I think you'll appreciate the way this is structured. You're not flattering them. You're seeing them accurately and helping them see how their own values point toward a particular choice. Storytelling remains the single most powerful influence tool in any communicator's arsenal. Stories bypass the analytical mind and speak directly to imagination and emotion. When you tell a true, relevant story about someone who faced a similar situation and found a way through it, you help listeners not just understand a concept intellectually, but feel its possibility in their own lives. The best stories are never about how impressive you are. They're about how someone just like the person you're talking to found something they were looking for. When someone raises objections, receive them as gifts. An objection is a window into what actually matters to this person, what they're afraid of, what they need, what they haven't yet seen. Instead of mounting a counter-argument, get genuinely curious. That's an important point. Can you tell me more about what drives that concern? Or, what would need to be true for this to feel right to you? This approach treats objections as the beginning of deeper understanding, not as obstacles to overcome. And always, always keep this North Star in view. The most ethical, most sustainable, most genuinely powerful influence creates outcomes where everyone involved feels heard, respected, and served. When you operate consistently from this principle, something remarkable happens. People don't just accept your ideas. They seek your input. They actively want your perspective. They bring you into their decisions because they trust that your influence serves their interests alongside yours. That's not persuasion. That's something more valuable. That's becoming someone whose presence genuinely makes things better. Chapter 9. The invisible force behind every conversation. There's a skill that determines more about your success in relationships, in leadership, in life, than almost anything else you could develop. It's not your vocabulary. It's not your eloquence. It's not even your confidence. It's your emotional intelligence. And most people have never been formally taught a single thing about it. Emotional intelligence is the capacity to recognize, understand, and skillfully navigate the emotions that arise in yourself and in others during interactions. Not to suppress them, not to perform around them, to work with them consciously. Because emotions aren't obstacles to good communication. They are the communication more often than not. Think about the last conversation that went sideways, the last time you said something you immediately regretted or walked away from an exchange feeling vaguely off without quite knowing why. Almost certainly, there was an emotional undercurrent that neither of you was fully aware of, something running beneath the surface that shaped every word, every pause, every interpretation. Emotional intelligence is the ability to see that undercurrent, name it, and navigate it skillfully, rather than being dragged by it. The first dimension is emotional self-awareness, the ability to recognize your own emotions as they arise in real time and understand how they're coloring your communication. This is harder than it sounds. Most of us are so focused on the content of what we want to convey that we're completely unaware of the emotional weather we're broadcasting. We don't realize we're coming across as distant when we think we're being professional. We don't see that our helpful tone sounds critical. We don't notice that our enthusiasm is overwhelming someone who needs space. Here's something worth developing: what researchers call emotional granularity, the ability to distinguish between emotional states with real precision. Not just, "I feel bad," but "I feel resentful," which is different from "I feel disappointed," which is different from "I feel quietly scared." This precision matters enormously because different emotional states require completely different responses. The approach that works when you're mildly frustrated will backfire when you're genuinely grieving. The communication style that serves you when you're excitedly energized might create real problems when you're operating from exhaustion and masking it as enthusiasm. The second dimension is self-regulation, the ability to manage your emotional responses consciously, rather than simply being run by them. This isn't emotional suppression. Suppression is like holding a beach ball underwater. It takes enormous energy, and eventually the ball explodes back to the surface with more force than before. Self-regulation is something entirely different. It's the capacity to feel your emotions fully and honestly while making a conscious choice about how and when to express them. The gateway to self-regulation is the pause, that breath-sized space between what you feel and what you do. When something triggers an emotional reaction in you, the natural impulse is immediate expression. The reactive word, the defensive posture, the sharp response that releases the pressure but damages the relationship. The pause interrupts that pattern. It's simple. It's not easy. And with practice, it becomes one of the most powerful tools you possess. Advanced self-regulation goes further. It involves learning to shift your emotional state intentionally when the situation requires it. If you're agitated, but the conversation needs your calm. If you're withdrawn, but someone needs your warmth. If you're anxious, but leadership requires your steadiness. You're not performing a false emotion. You're accessing a real one that you might not be feeling most prominently in this moment. Through breath, through deliberate physical posture, through a quiet internal reorientation. Just as you'd choose different clothing for different situations, you can learn to choose the emotional register that best serves the moment and the person in front of you. The third dimension is empathy, your ability to recognize and feel an echo of someone else's emotional experience, not just to understand it intellectually, but to genuinely sense it. This requires something that our efficiency-obsessed culture rarely encourages, slowing down enough to actually let another person in. True empathy begins with curiosity, the willingness to ask yourself genuinely, what is this person's experience from the inside? What does the world look like from where they're standing? This seems obvious, but in practice, most of us assume constantly, automatically, that others think and feel very similarly to how we do. And this assumption leads to misunderstanding after misunderstanding because they often don't. When someone's emotional reaction seems disproportionate to you, empathy asks, what would this situation mean to someone with their history, their fears, their specific wounds? From that vantage point, what seems overblown often becomes completely understandable. And when you can genuinely understand why someone is feeling what they're feeling, even if you'd feel differently in the same situation, something in the relationship shifts. They feel less judged, less alone, more willing to be honest. The fourth dimension is social awareness, the ability to read the emotional climate of groups, teams, and rooms. Every collective environment has an emotional atmosphere, energized or exhausted, psychologically safe or quietly guarded, creatively alive or defensively shut down. Skilled communicators can sense this climate when they walk in, and they understand that their own presence either contributes to the atmosphere or disrupts it. Emotional contagion is real and measurable. When you enter a room carrying calm, confidence, you genuinely shift the people around you toward greater calm. When you bring anxiety or irritability, you seed it in others. This isn't mystical, it's neurological. And once you understand it, you can't really unhear it. You become aware that you are constantly, unavoidably shaping the emotional environment of every interaction you're part of. The only question is whether you're doing it consciously or accidentally. The fifth dimension is relationship management, the ability to use all of this emotional awareness to guide your interactions toward outcomes that genuinely serve everyone involved. This includes knowing when to have difficult conversations and when to wait. Understanding how to motivate different personalities, recognizing when someone needs support and when they need honest challenge. Knowing how to repair trust after it's been damaged, how to apologize in ways that actually land, and how to express genuine appreciation in ways the other person can truly receive. One of the most important and most freeing concepts in emotional intelligence is the distinction between impact and intent. These are two separate things, and conflating them causes enormous, unnecessary damage in relationships. Just because someone didn't intend to hurt you doesn't mean your hurt isn't real and valid. Just because you didn't intend to come across as dismissive doesn't mean you didn't. Emotionally intelligent communicators hold both truths simultaneously. They can say, I don't think you meant to make me feel that way, and I did feel that way, and I think it's worth us talking about. Or, I can see that what I said landed differently than I meant it to. Let me try again. This distinction, separating impact from intent, removes blame from the equation without removing accountability. And it transforms conflict from a battle about who was wrong into a conversation about what actually happened and what needs to change. Perhaps the most important thing to understand about emotional intelligence is that it isn't a destination, it's a practice. You don't develop it once and then possess it forever. It requires ongoing attention to your patterns, to your triggers, to your impact on others, to the ways you're still growing. The good news is that every conversation is an opportunity to practice. Every interaction is information, and the investment compounds over time in ways that quietly transform every dimension of your life. Chapter 10. Tools for the truly exceptional communicator. Everything we've covered so far forms your foundation: the self-awareness, the listening, the empathy, the trust-building. These aren't beginner skills to graduate from. They're the bedrock on which everything else is built. But once that foundation is solid, there are more sophisticated tools available that can take your communication from genuinely good to genuinely exceptional. Think of what follows not as a bag of tricks, but as a more refined toolkit. These techniques require practice to use gracefully. They demand that your intent is always in service of the other person, not your own agenda. And they become most powerful when they're so deeply integrated that you're no longer consciously deploying them. They're simply how you communicate. The first is meta-communication, the ability to step outside the content of a conversation and speak about the conversation itself. Most people stay inside the content, even when the conversation is subtly stuck or misaligned. Meta-communication names what's happening between you, which creates an opportunity to address it directly. I notice we seem to be talking at cross purposes here. Can we take a step back and make sure we're working from the same understanding? Or, I'm sensing there might be something we're not quite saying directly. Would it be worth naming it? This takes a certain quiet courage. It can feel risky to name the subtext, but skilled communicators use it regularly because unaddressed relational friction will eventually derail even the most technically proficient conversation. The second is reframing, the art of helping someone see a situation from a different angle that opens up new possibilities, not by dismissing their current perspective, but by expanding it. When someone says, "This situation is completely out of control," you might offer, "It sounds like things have gotten really unpredictable. And I'm wondering if part of what's hard is not yet knowing what adjustments to make. What information would help you feel more oriented?" You're not correcting them. You're gently shifting from a closed frame, "This is a disaster," to an open one, "This is uncharted, and here's what we might need." Good reframing honors the emotion first. It never minimizes or bypasses. It adds possibility to an already valid experience rather than replacing the experience with a more convenient one. Anchoring is a technique That shapes how people evaluate options by establishing reference points. Before you mention the specific details of what you're proposing, you might first describe the range of approaches that exist, which makes your particular proposal feel more reasonable and well-positioned within that range. If you expect a project to require 6 months and significant resources, you might contextualize it first. Initiatives like this typically run anywhere from 8 months to a year and require substantial investment. We've designed this one to be leaner, with a projected timeline of around 6 months. The anchor changes the frame. The same 6 months now feels efficient rather than long. Used ethically, which means using real accurate ranges rather than manufactured comparisons. Anchoring helps people make better informed decisions, not manipulated ones. Future pacing is the practice of helping someone imaginatively inhabit a positive future outcome so vividly that it becomes motivating in the present. Instead of describing features and benefits abstractly, you help them experience the result. Picture yourself 3 months from now. You've implemented this. The friction in your mornings has largely disappeared, and you've reclaimed about an hour of focused time each day. What becomes possible for you when that hour exists? This works because the brain struggles to fully distinguish between a vividly imagined experience and a remembered one. When someone can genuinely picture and feel a positive outcome, they begin to move toward it, not because you convinced them, but because they can already sense themselves there. Strategic vulnerability might be the most counterintuitive tool of all. In a world that rewards projection of competence and certainty, deliberately sharing appropriate personal limitations or admitting what you don't know can create trust more quickly than almost anything else. The key words are appropriate and genuine. This isn't performing humility to seem likable. It's honest acknowledgement of your real edges. I haven't encountered this exact situation before, and I want to think carefully before I give you a confident answer, which signals something people find deeply reassuring, that you won't pretend to certainty you don't have. When done well, strategic vulnerability creates psychological safety at a remarkable speed. It gives the other person permission to be honest about their own uncertainties, which is usually where the most productive conversations begin. Conversational threading is the art of weaving the conversation into a coherent, living whole, picking up threads from earlier and connecting them meaningfully to what's happening now. When you can say, toward the end of a conversation, remember when you mentioned at the start that your biggest concern is whether this will actually stick? I think everything we've discussed points directly to that. Here's what I'd want you to hold onto. You're demonstrating not just that you listened, but that you were holding the whole conversation as a unified thing, not just a sequence of isolated exchanges. This creates a sense of being genuinely accompanied through a thought process, which is one of the most valuable experiences one person can offer another. Paradoxical thinking engages people's curiosity by presenting ideas in ways that appear contradictory, but reveal something deeper when you sit with them. The fastest way to gain influence might be to stop trying to be influential, or the most effective way to be heard might be to talk less. These create a small, productive interruption in normal thinking, a moment where someone's brain says, "Wait, hold on." And that interruption creates genuine engagement with the idea. Used sparingly and with substance, paradox is powerful. Used as a gimmick, it's annoying. Temporal shifting, moving someone's attention between past, present, and future, unlocks different kinds of insight at different moments. When someone is stuck in a current problem, helping them look back to how they navigated something similar before can reconnect them with capabilities they've forgotten they have. When you look back 5 years from now, what do you think you'll wish you'd prioritized in this moment? That question shifts the entire frame of a decision. Different time horizons reveal different truths. Energy management, consciously tracking and adjusting the emotional momentum of a conversation, is the conductor's art. You sense when energy is flagging and introduce something that reignites it. A relevant story, a surprising insight, a direct question that lands like a beam of light. You sense when energy is building towards something unproductive, defensiveness, overwhelm, scattered thinking, and you bring it down with a slower pace, a deeper breath, a spacious silence. Conversations have rhythm. Exceptional communicators work with that rhythm rather than ignoring it. And finally, conversational judo, the ability to redirect aggressive or argumentative energy rather than meeting it with resistance. When someone is combative or closed, pushing back directly tends to create more opposition. But curiosity disarms almost everything. You're clearly passionate about this. Help me understand what matters most to you here, and let's see if we can find the approach that actually addresses your real concerns. You're not backing down. You're changing the frame from opposition to collaboration and channeling the energy that was aimed at you toward the shared problem instead. These tools become most powerful when they're invisibly integrated, when they're not techniques you consciously select and apply, but simply the natural expression of how you engage. That integration happens through practice, reflection, and time. Choose one or two to work with deliberately for a few weeks. Let them become natural before you add the next. The goal is never to impress people with your sophistication, it's to serve them better. Chapter 11. Bringing your best self to work. Professional communication is where all your foundational skills meet real stakes. Your ability to communicate effectively at work doesn't just affect your performance, it determines your trajectory. Whether opportunities come toward you or past you, whether people want to work with you or simply work near you, whether your ideas gain traction or disappear into the room. And yet, professional settings are often where people communicate worst, because the pressure to appear competent, to navigate hierarchy, to protect their position, can override the authentic, connected way of engaging that actually creates influence. The first thing to understand about professional communication is that every single interaction serves two simultaneous purposes: moving the task forward and maintaining the relationship. The most effective professionals never sacrifice one for the other. They find ways to achieve concrete outcomes while making the people involved feel heard, respected, and valued. This isn't softness. It's strategic intelligence. Let's start with meetings, because meetings are where professional reputations are built or quietly diminished. When you're leading a meeting, your primary job isn't to transmit information, it's to create the conditions for collective thinking. This means establishing psychological safety early, making it clear through your tone and your behavior that ideas can be offered without immediate judgment, that questions are welcome, that uncertainty is honest rather than shameful. Begin by naming the purpose and the desired outcome clearly, not the agenda items, the purpose. What does success look like when you walk out of this room? That shared clarity orients everyone's contribution toward the same destination. Draw out specific voices rather than opening the floor generally. Generic invitations to contribute. Does anyone have thoughts? Tend to produce the same predictable voices every time. Specific, genuine invitations. Layla, you've been closest to the customer on this. What are you seeing that we might be missing? Communicate that you actually want and value that particular perspective. People rise to specific invitations in ways they rarely do to open ones. When you're participating in someone else's meeting, develop the habit of asking yourself before you speak, does this move the conversation forward, or does it serve mostly my own need to be heard? This single question, practiced honestly, will transform your professional reputation over time. When you do speak, make it count. When you disagree, come with an alternative rather than just an objection. I have concerns about that approach. Here's what I'd want us to consider instead is far more useful than I don't think that will work. Communicating with senior leaders requires a specific calibration. Executives are operating under significant information load and time pressure. They don't want every nuance and caveat. They want clarity, perspective, and confident recommendations. Lead with your conclusion, then provide the reasoning, then the supporting evidence, then the implementation path and what resources it requires. This structure says, implicitly, I've thought this through. I know what I'm recommending. I'm not asking you to do the analysis. I've done it for me. Use language that conveys appropriate conviction. I recommend this approach because, rather than, I was kind of thinking, maybe this could potentially. Confidence in presentation doesn't mean rigidity. It means you've done the thinking and you're standing behind it, while remaining genuinely open to input that might refine your view. Written communication, particularly email, has become one of the highest leverage professional skills because it's where so much goes wrong. Email strips away tone, expression, and context. The message you compose in a focused, neutral state might land as cold or abrupt when read by someone who's already stressed. A sentence you intended as direct might feel dismissive. A quick reply you dashed off between meetings might be interpreted as indifferent. Before you hit send on anything that matters, read it from the recipient's perspective, not as you meant it, as it might land. Would this feel respectful if you received it? Does the tone carry the warmth or the clarity the situation calls for? Sometimes the only edit you need to make is a single sentence at the beginning. Thanks so much for your patience with this. I've been thinking it through carefully. That one sentence changes the emotional context for everything that follows. Structure emails for action, not just information. Clear subject line. Context if needed. Main point stated early. Specific request or next step stated clearly at the end. Don't make someone hunt for what you actually need from them. Managing upward, communicating effectively with your supervisor is one of the most underrated professional skills and one of the most career-defining. Your goal is to make their job easier while demonstrating your value as a thinker and a contributor. This means understanding how they communicate and adapting accordingly. Some leaders want detailed updates and frequent check-ins. Others want high-level summaries and to hear from you only when something requires their attention. Neither preference is better, but failing to understand which one you're working with will create friction regardless of the quality of your work. Bring solutions alongside problems. When you identify an issue, invest time thinking through possible approaches before you bring it up. Arriving with, "Here's the problem, here are 3 possible ways to address it, and here's what I'd recommend," signals a completely different level of thinking than simply surfacing a difficulty and waiting to be told what to do. It also saves everyone time, and time is the most valued currency in most professional environments. Give feedback specifically and behaviorally, not globally or personally. The last 2 reports came in without executive summaries, which makes it harder for leadership to review quickly. Is something actionable? You're not detail-oriented enough. Is a character judgment that puts people on the defensive and doesn't give them anything specific to change. The same precision applies to receiving feedback. Instead of deflecting or defending, get genuinely curious about the specific behavior or outcome the person is pointing to. Can you tell me more about what you observed? I want to understand what to do differently. Professional communication mastery, at its core, comes back to the same truth we've been building toward throughout this entire conversation. Every interaction is an opportunity to move both the work and the relationship forward. The professionals who understand this, who can achieve outcomes while making people feel valued in the process, are the ones who become genuinely indispensable, not because they're the loudest in the room, not because they're the most technically brilliant, but because people want to work with them, because they make hard things easier, because their presence in a conversation tends to make the thinking better, the trust stronger, and the outcome more likely to actually land. That's the kind of professional communicator worth becoming. Bölüm 4 yazımı başlıyor. Chapters 12 ile 15. Personal relationships, public speaking, digital communication, putting it all together. Chapter 12. The conversations that matter. Most of all the arenas where communication skills are tested, personal relationships are the most demanding. Not because the stakes are always highest in terms of consequences, but because the emotional investment is deepest. The people closest to you have the greatest capacity to make you feel completely understood and completely undone, sometimes in the same afternoon. And here's the paradox that trips up so many genuinely good people. We often communicate worst with the people we love most. We bring our polished, patient, professionally calibrated selves to work, and then walk through the front door and revert to patterns that we'd be genuinely embarrassed to use with a stranger. The short circuit of assumptions, the half-listening while scrolling, the tone that carries the weight of a long day and lands harder than we meant it to. This isn't character failure, it's familiarity without intentionality. And the good news is that the same skills that transform professional communication can transform personal relationships, often more powerfully, because the soil is richer and the stakes are closer to your heart. The most foundational skill in intimate communication is emotional attunement, the ability to sense and respond to a loved one's emotional state with real sensitivity, not just with good intentions. This goes beyond noticing when someone is upset. It means developing genuine fluency in the specific emotional language of the people closest to you. Because everyone has one, a particular set of ways they express love, stress, excitement, and fear that is uniquely their own. Some people, when they're stressed, need to talk through everything out loud, circling the problem verbally until it loses some of its power. Others need quiet and space first to process internally before they're ready to bring anyone else in. If you're a talker trying to support a processor and you push for the conversation before they're ready, you might mean to help and end up making things worse. If you're a processor trying to support a talker and you give them space when they desperately need to feel heard, they might experience your silence as abandonment. Learning these individual languages for each specific person you love is ongoing, deliberate work, and the most direct shortcut is asking, not once, but as a living conversation. When you're overwhelmed, what actually helps? What do you need from me in those moments? Most people have never been asked this directly, and the question itself is an act of profound care. Emotional triggers are more active in personal relationships than anywhere else. The people closest to you know, consciously or not, exactly where your most tender places are, and in moments of conflict, under enough pressure, they may find those places even without intending to. When you get triggered by someone you love, the intensity of the reaction often has less to do with what just happened and more to do with the accumulated weight of past experiences, old wounds, and established patterns between you. The practice here is not to become someone who doesn't get triggered. That's not a realistic or even desirable goal. It's to develop the ability to recognize the trigger as it activates, name it internally, and create just enough pause to choose your response rather than simply enacting your reaction. Something just got activated in me. Give me a moment before I respond is not weakness. It's emotional maturity in action. Conflict in personal relationships is painful, partly because we have so much more to lose. The fear that saying the wrong thing might damage something precious can paralyze us into silence, or can push us into the opposite extreme, saying too much in the worst possible way because the pressure has been building for too long. The principle that transforms personal conflict is this: you can deeply disagree with someone's behavior while completely loving and respecting who they are. These are not contradictory positions. They are, in fact, the foundation of mature love. When you can address a specific behavior, what you did in this particular situation had this impact on me, without making it a referendum on the other person's character or worth, the conversation has somewhere to go. When every conflict becomes evidence of a fundamental flaw in the other person, there is nowhere to go. Use I language not as a script, but as an orientation. When you're on your phone during dinner, I feel invisible, like I'm competing with the screen for your attention. That sentence invites a conversation. You're always on your phone. You never actually listen to me. Invites a defense. Same feeling underneath. Completely different invitation. Listen for what lives. Underneath your loved one's words, especially when those words are coming out in ways that are hard to receive. Criticism is almost always covering a need. Anger is almost always covering a hurt. Withdrawal is almost always covering a fear. When someone you love says something that stings, it's worth asking, quietly, internally, what are they really trying to say? What do they need that they're not quite finding the words for? Appreciation deserves as much intention as conflict resolution. Most people in long relationships fall into a pattern of only discussing the relationship when something is wrong, which creates an unconscious association between relationship conversations and negative experiences. Deliberately and regularly naming what you value about someone, specifically, not generically, is one of the most powerful maintenance practices available. Not thanks for everything you do, but I noticed how you handled that situation with such patience, and it reminded me how lucky I am to have someone like you in my corner. Specific appreciation lands. Generic appreciation warms the surface but doesn't reach the roots. Understanding how different people prefer to receive love and care, whether through words, quality time, physical presence, acts of service, or thoughtful gestures, allows you to love people in the language they actually feel. You might be offering care consistently and genuinely, and the other person might be genuinely receiving very little of it, not because either of you is failing, but because you're speaking different dialects of the same language. Asking what makes you feel most cared for is one of the most intimate and useful questions you can bring into any close relationship. Difficult family dynamics carry the additional weight of shared history and deeply established patterns. Family members often relate to who you were rather than who you've become. And you may find yourself, in family settings, slipping back into roles and reactions that you thought you'd outgrown. This is not regression. It's the power of long-established neural pathways. The antidote is gentle, consistent redirecting, not fighting the pattern dramatically, but quietly, steadily choosing differently again and again, until the new pattern becomes the more familiar one. Romantic relationships require all of this and more, because they ask two people to build a shared life while remaining whole as individuals, to be deeply interdependent while maintaining autonomy, to grow together while also growing as separate people. This is not a simple ask. It's a lifelong practice. The most important single habit in romantic communication is regular, intentional check-ins, not just when something is wrong, but as ongoing maintenance of understanding and connection. What's working? What each person needs more or less of, where you're each growing, and how the relationship can support that growth. These conversations, held consistently and with genuine curiosity, prevent the kind of slow drift that turns into sudden distance. Chapter 13. Finding your voice in front of a crowd. Public speaking frightens most people more than almost anything else, and not without reason. Standing in front of a group, with all those eyes on you, your words amplified and your presence exposed, it triggers some of our most ancient social anxieties. The fear of judgment, the fear of rejection, the fear of being seen and found wanting. But here's what I want you to understand. That fear, at its core, is a misidentification. You're not afraid of speaking. You're afraid of not connecting. You're afraid of the gap between who you are and who the audience needs you to be. And the path through that fear isn't to eliminate it. It's to redirect your entire focus from yourself to them. The moment you genuinely shift your orientation from how am I coming across to what does this audience need from this conversation, something changes. The self-consciousness starts to dissolve because self-consciousness requires a certain amount of inward focus to sustain itself. When your attention is fully outward, genuinely curious about the people in front of you, genuinely committed to serving their experience, there's simply less room for the performance anxiety to live. Great public speaking is not performance. It's communication at scale. The same principles that make one-on-one conversation powerful: presence, empathy, authenticity, genuine care for the other person's experience, apply entirely when that other person becomes 50 people or 500. Before you write a single word of any presentation, ask, who is this audience? And what is their actual situation right now? What do they already know? What do they care about most? What problem are they trying to solve? And how does what you're about to share connect directly to that problem? An audience-centered presentation begins with the audience, not with what you want to say, but with what they need to hear. Your opening moments are everything. Audiences make the decision to be present or to mentally check out within the first 30 seconds of any talk. Don't waste those seconds on logistics, pleasantries, or warming up. Start with something that immediately signals, I understand what matters to you, and I'm about to give you something worth your attention. A surprising statistic that reframes how they're thinking about the topic, a story that puts them immediately inside an experience they recognize, a direct question that creates genuine self-reflection, a bold, honest statement that challenges a comfortable assumption. Whatever you choose, connect it immediately and explicitly to the core message of what follows. Don't leave people wondering why you started there. Structure your talk as a journey with a clear arc. Your opening establishes the territory and why it matters. Your middle delivers the substance, the insights, the evidence, the perspectives that shift thinking. Your closing synthesizes what's been shared and makes it live, translating abstract insight into specific, actionable, personal meaning for each person in the room. Use clear signposts to guide people through the journey. Tell them where you're going before you go there. Remind them how each section connects to the whole. People can only absorb what they can follow. Storytelling is your most powerful instrument at the front of a room, not because stories are entertaining diversions from the real content, but because stories are the content in the deepest sense. Facts inform, arguments persuade, stories transform. When you tell a true, specific, vividly rendered story about someone navigating a challenge, making a choice, discovering something, you bypass the analytical mind and speak directly to imagination and emotion. People stop thinking about their to-do lists. They start living inside your story. One principle worth tattooing on your memory. In every presentation story, your audience is the hero, not you. Your stories should help people see themselves, their own struggles, their own potential, their own capacity for the change you're pointing toward. When someone in your audience thinks, "That's me, I felt that way," you've made contact. You've moved from presentation to conversation, even in a room of hundreds. Anxiety about public speaking doesn't need to be eliminated. It needs to be redirected. The physiological state of nervousness and the physiological state of excitement are almost identical. Both involve heightened heart rate, increased energy, sharpened attention. The difference is the story you tell yourself about what's happening. "I'm terrified" sends you into fight or flight. "I'm energized, I care about this, and I'm ready" channels that same physical state into dynamic, engaged presence. Practice until the content is familiar enough that you're not carrying it consciously. But don't over-rehearse into robotics. Know your material well enough to be present with your audience, not reading from an internal teleprompter. Breathe deliberately before you begin. Slow, full breaths that activate calm and open your voice. Arrive early enough to feel the space, adjust to the environment, and greet a few people in the audience before you begin. Because speaking to people you've already connected with, even briefly, is categorically different from speaking to a room of strangers. The questions and moments of challenge that arise in Q&A are not threats. They are the conversation continuing. Receive every question as genuine, even the combative ones. Thank the person, not performatively, but as a real acknowledgement that they've engaged. When you don't know something, say so cleanly, "That's outside what I know," with confidence. I'd rather give you an honest answer later than a confident wrong one. Now, that kind of intellectual honesty builds credibility rather than diminishing it. Virtual presentations demand extra intentionality because the medium strips away so much of what creates connection in person. You lose the physical presence, the shared energy of a room, the nonverbal feedback that tells you whether you're landing or losing people. Compensate by increasing your vocal range. More variation in pace, pitch, and emphasis than you might use in person. Look directly into your camera lens rather than at your screen to create the impression of eye contact. Ask specific questions of specific people rather than opening to the group. Create interaction points every few minutes, not because the content requires it, but because human attention requires it. The single most important mindset shift for public speaking is this: the audience is not your judge. They are your partners. They showed up. They want you to succeed. Because when you succeed, they benefit. When you walk into any speaking situation with genuine warmth toward the people in front of you, genuine curiosity about their experience, genuine desire to leave them better than you found them, the dynamic transforms. You stop being a performer, seeking approval, and become a guide offering value. That shift is everything. Chapter 14, Staying Human in a Digital World. We live in a world that has never been more connected and has never felt more disconnected. We have more ways to communicate than any generation in human history, and simultaneously, rates of loneliness have been climbing steadily for decades. Something about the way we're using our communication tools is not giving us what we most deeply need from them. This isn't an argument against technology. It's an invitation to use it more intentionally, Digital communication strips away most of what makes communication rich. No tone of voice, no facial expression, no physical presence, no immediate feedback that tells you whether your message is landing the way you intended. Your words arrive in a vacuum of context, and the human brain, confronted with ambiguity, almost always fills that vacuum with anxiety. A delayed response becomes, "They're ignoring me." A brief reply becomes, "They're upset." A neutral sentence becomes, "They're being passive-aggressive." The absence of warmth reads as coldness. The absence of an exclamation point reads as disapproval. This is why digital communication requires more intentionality, not less. Because the medium is doing less work for you, you have to do more work than you would in person. Email, for all its ubiquity, remains remarkably poorly used. Most professional emails are either overlong and understructured, or so stripped down they feel abrasive. The sweet spot is clarity with warmth. Message that gets efficiently to the point while carrying enough human texture that the recipient doesn't feel processed. A single sentence of genuine acknowledgement at the opening. "I really appreciate your patience while I thought this through." Or, "Your question prompted me to dig into this more carefully, which I'm grateful for." Changes the entire emotional context of everything that follows. Not because you're performing warmth, but because you're actually being warm in a medium that tends to suppress it. Keep it brief and genuine. Then move clearly to your content. Structure for action. Your email's subject line should tell the recipient immediately what they need to know and what, if anything, they need to do. Your opening should provide context. Your main point should appear early, not buried in paragraph 3. Your closing should specify clearly what you need from them, by when, and what the next step looks like. Don't make someone work to understand what you're asking. Text messaging occupies a strange middle space between formal and informal, and the boundaries shift depending on context, relationship, and organizational culture. One of the most frequent causes of unnecessary friction in professional environments is mismatched expectations around response time. Some people interpret an unanswered text as dismissal. Others treat text as asynchronous and non-urgent. Neither assumption is inherently wrong, but the mismatch between them creates real problems. When in doubt, name your expectation. "No rush on this. Just want to make sure it's on your radar," or "This is time sensitive. Would appreciate a quick confirmation when you can." A single sentence prevents hours of anxious interpretation. Video calls have become one of the primary arenas of professional communication, and most people treat them like degraded in-person meetings rather than a distinct medium with its own demands. On a video call, your face is the primary information available. Your expressions, your presence, your attentiveness, everything that might be filled in by physical presence in a shared room has to live in that small rectangle on someone's screen. This means being more deliberate about eye contact, which means looking at the camera lens, not at the screen, more expressive with your face, and more vocal about agreement and engagement, since the subtle nods and micro-expressions that communicate attention in person are often lost in video compression. Manage online conflict with particular care because digital mediums are uniquely prone to escalation. Without the moderating effects of physical presence, the tonal nuance, the facial expression, the shared humanity of being in the same room, people assume negative intent more readily and respond more harshly than they would face to face. When an email or message exchange starts to become tense, move to a richer medium as quickly as possible. I want to make sure we understand each other well. Can we jump on a call for 10 minutes? That request almost always de-escalates. It also signals that the relationship matters to you more than winning the text thread. The boundary work that digital communication requires has become genuinely important for well-being. The always available nature of digital communication creates a kind of ambient pressure that, over time, erodes the quality of your attention, your rest, and your in-person presence. When you're perpetually partially available, never quite fully present anywhere because part of your attention is always on the notification that might arrive, the people in front of you receive a diminished version of you, and you receive a diminished version of your own life. Setting and communicating clear boundaries around digital availability isn't about being less connected. It's about protecting the quality of your presence when you are connected. I typically respond to email within 24 hours, or I keep my evening screen free, but I'm reliably available between 8 and 6. These aren't apologies. They're professional clarity that prevents misunderstanding and models healthy boundaries for the people around you. The deeper principle threading through all of this is simply this. Digital tools are a means of human connection, not a substitute for it. The most effective digital communicators use technology to enhance and extend genuine relationships, not to replace the face-to-face, voice-to-voice, present-in-the-same-room contact that human beings fundamentally need. Be ruthlessly intentional about which conversations should happen digitally and which ones deserve more. The threshold question is always, would this be better as a real conversation? If the answer is yes, have the real conversation. Chapter 15. This is where it actually begins. You've come a long way in this conversation, and I want to honor that, because staying with something this substantial, sitting with these ideas, letting them move through your thinking, that's not passive. That's already a form of practice. But I also want to be honest with you about something. Knowledge about communication and actually communicating are two separate things. The distance between them is only crossed by one thing: doing, practicing, trying something, noticing what happens, adjusting, and trying again. There is no shortcut through this gap. There is only the willingness to show up and practice, imperfectly, repeatedly, with growing self-awareness and increasing skill. So here's how I'd encourage you to move forward. Don't try to implement everything at once. That's the fastest way to implement nothing. Instead, sit with what you've absorbed and ask yourself honestly, what is the one area that would make the most difference in my life right now? Maybe it's listening, really listening, because you've started to realize how much you've been waiting to speak instead. Maybe it's self-awareness, because you've recognized patterns in your communication that are costing you in ways you haven't fully acknowledged. Maybe it's difficult conversations, because there's someone in your life right now who deserves a real one. Choose that one area. Work it deliberately for the next few weeks. Not perfectly. Perfectly is not the goal. Intentionally. Notice when you're doing it well and when you're not. Be curious about both. Let the failures be as informative as the successes. Then, once that practice starts to feel more natural, layer in the next. This is how real skill builds, not through a sprint of motivation after a powerful learning experience, but through the patient, consistent, cumulative practice of choosing a slightly better response, one conversation at a time. Practice in low-stakes situations before you need the skills in high-stakes ones. Use your daily conversations, the brief exchange with the person making your coffee, the check-in with a colleague, the dinner conversation with someone you love, as practice ground for the skills you're developing. Active listening doesn't have to wait for a crisis to be practiced. Emotional regulation doesn't require a major conflict to be developed. These muscles build in the ordinary moments, so they're available when the extraordinary ones arrive. Seek feedback from people who will tell you the truth. Not people who will tell you what you want to hear, but people who care enough about your growth to be honest. Ask specific questions. When I'm explaining something complex, do you feel like I give you enough context? Or do I sometimes assume too much? Or, in our disagreements, do I seem genuinely open to your perspective? Or does it come across like I've already decided? These questions are uncomfortable to ask. The answers are invaluable. Keep a communication journal, even briefly. After conversations that went particularly well or particularly badly, spend 3 minutes reflecting. What happened? What did I try? How did the other person respond? What would I do differently? What did I do that I want to remember? This practice of reflection closes the loop between experience and learning in a way that passive experience alone rarely does. Watch the people who communicate in ways you admire, not to copy them, but to reverse engineer the principles behind what they do. What specific behaviors create the safety you feel around them? What is it about how they listen that makes you feel so received? How do they handle disagreement in ways that strengthen rather than damage the relationship? Extract the principle, then find your own authentic expression of it. As you develop these skills, something will happen that you might not expect. The growth won't stay contained to communication. It will spill over. Your relationships will become more real. Your professional presence will become more grounded. Your ability to navigate uncertainty and conflict will increase. Your sense of your own agency, your trust that you can handle whatever conversation needs to be had, will grow steadily and meaningfully. Because at its core, communication mastery isn't about becoming a more polished speaker or a more sophisticated strategist. It's about becoming someone who is genuinely, deeply present with the people around them. Someone who brings real curiosity and real care into every exchange. Someone whose presence makes the people around them feel a little more seen, a little more understood, a little more capable of being themselves. That's the gift. Not just to the people you'll communicate with, but to yourself. Because a life filled with real connection, with conversations that actually go somewhere, with relationships that sustain you, with the quiet confidence of knowing you can say what needs to be said and hear what needs to be heard. That's a genuinely different quality of life. You have everything you need to build this. You don't need to wait until you feel ready. You don't need to get it perfect before you begin. You just need to start. In the next conversation, with the next person, with a little more presence than yesterday. That's enough. That's everything. Go make it count.